As we know, the war in Gaza has gone on for approximately 2 years. An equivalent of 6 nuclear weapons that were dropped on Hiroshima. 6 of those bombs were dropped on Gaza over the past 2 years. Because we've seen throughout this war that the Israelis and the Americans have played a deceitful game multiple times. Previous Zionist leadership would say, I wish I would sleep and wake up and there's no more Gaza on the map. Why would they agree to this ceasefire agreement given that they know that the Zionist entity would not hold up its flat? The winter is coming along now, the rain is coming along, every time it rains their tents are filled up with water, and this is done by design and on purpose. These are the options that are given now to the Palestinian people. You want to live in Gaza? Here you go, stay in Gaza. This is the Gaza we're going to give you, which is hell. Or we can open up the border for you and leave Gaza. They are raping Palestinian women inside the dungeons of Israeli prisons, where they are allowing dogs to rape the Palestinian prisoners, where all of these atrocities are happening, and the Ummah and the entire world is hearing this news and seeing this news live. It's going to reach a boiling point where the Ummah moves. So, a people who refuse all of this are people who are willing to continue to resist against occupation, despite everything they've paid in price. Know that the Western world is on the back foot. This is absolute bankruptcy. The fact that they have to go back to direct colonialism in our lands means that they are bankrupt and they are on the back foot, because they no longer can rely on their own puppets within the Muslim world to carry out the job.
Assalamu alaikum and welcome to the Narrative House podcast. I'm your host Rayyan. Today we have a special guest, Amer, who's Palestinian and he's currently residing in Sydney, Australia. We'll talk a bit about the ceasefire, which was put in place about 2 months ago, what led up to it, what's resulted from it, and what's going to happen for the future of Gaza and the region in general. And so, ahlan wa sahlan, assalamu alaikum, Amer. Welcome to the Narrative House podcast.
Ahlan fiik wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Jazakallah khair for hosting me, and inshallah look forward to this episode to unpack what's happening in Gaza. I'm pretty sure a lot of people are wondering where things are at. So, jazakallah khair once again.
Jazakallah khair wa iyyakum. So, like I said in the beginning, it's been about 2 months since the ceasefire was put in place. Just for a bit of background, can you explain what were the main events, the pressures that sort of led up to the ceasefire agreement, and what has then resulted from that?
Okay, so as we know, the war in Gaza has gone on for approximately 2 years. And during these 2 years, there were multiple small ceasefires that only lasted for a month or 6 weeks or somewhere around there, and the war resumed straight after that. And there was no real pressure to end the war, as to say. The American administration has given the green light to Netanyahu, to the Israelis, to do as they like, what they like, however they like, and they provided them with everything possible. And if we remember when Trump was coming into power, when he was elected, before he came into office, one of the first things he said to Benjamin Netanyahu, Trump said to him, finish the job. Meaning, finish the job, get it over and done with. It's been nearly 2 years, or at that time it was approximately a year and a bit. And for the Americans, a year and a bit to finish the job in a small city like Gaza is a bit too long. It shouldn't have taken this long. So Trump is thinking, I'm about to step into power now, and this war is still going, and it's impacting America's standing on the global stage. It's impacting a lot of things, and most importantly, the whole entire Middle East region is being impacted due to this war, because we know that when Palestine is bleeding, then the whole Ummah is bleeding. And when Palestine is engulfed in flames, then the whole Ummah is engulfed in flames, not only the region. So the region is in flames, the people are angry, there is a huge risk to America's interests in the region when we talk about the Arab regimes and the surrounding countries, and also America's standing on the global stage. So Trump says to Netanyahu, finish the job. So coming to power, you should have finished the job. And he said at that time, Hamas released all the hostages or all hell will let loose. And at that time, I remember the people in Gaza, when Trump was about to come into power, and he tweeted this. He said, all hell will let loose. They're thinking, like, they're saying, what hell are you talking about? We've been living hell for the past 1 year and a bit. There's nothing more you can do to kill us. You've tried all different weapons on us. All American weapons have been tried in Gaza. Approximately an equivalent of 6 nuclear weapons that were dropped on Hiroshima. 6 of those bombs were dropped in Gaza over the past 2 years, equivalent to that. So the people are thinking, what hell are you talking about? We've been living hell all this time. And so it didn't change anything on the ground. I think what was the last straw for the Americans to really push for this ceasefire, a lasting ceasefire, which is up until today, we can say it's pretty much holding up, was the failed assassination attempt on the Hamas political leadership in Qatar. That was an absolute failure, a military failure, an intelligence failure, a political failure for the Zionist entity and for the Americans. Because we know that the Zionists cannot attempt such an attack on Qatar, which hosts the biggest US military base in the Middle East, without the approval, without the coordination with the Americans. So behind closed doors, I'm thinking the Israelis and the Americans are saying, you know what, this is an opportunity now to finish the job, meaning let's wipe out the entire political leadership of Hamas when they are inside this room negotiating a proposal that Trump proposed for an end to the war. And so this was like the bait. The bait was the US proposal to end the war. He is the bait. You come together in that room. Israel strikes once, twice, or 3 times on that room, and the entire political leadership is killed off. And after that, Netanyahu can come out and say, we have attained ultimate victory. There is no one left to negotiate with us from Hamas. So now we can impose whatever we want on Gaza, and so can America, and so can everyone else, because there is no one else at the other side of the table to sit down with us and negotiate. So this failure to kill the political leadership of Hamas in Qatar was a huge failure, to the extent that America said, oh, like, we didn't know, we knew when they were about to hit, but we didn't know before. They had to take a back step, and Qatar is like, what's going on? We are your allies to the Americans. How could you allow this to happen? And Israelis were kind of shocked that it failed, and details emerged that the reason why it failed was due to the security precautions that were taken by the Hamas political leadership, where they expected possibly something like this can happen. Because we've seen throughout this war that the Israelis and the Americans have played a deceitful game multiple times. The first time was against Hassan Nasrallah. At that time, Netanyahu was at the US, and the US was proposing a ceasefire agreement with Hezbollah, between Hezbollah and the Zionist entity. And we know that when it comes to these type of agreements that someone has to agree upon, the top leadership has to have a look at the paper and look at what's being proposed, and in order to agree or disagree. So at that time, right at that time, there was the Israeli strike that killed Hassan Nasrallah in the tunnel, inside the bunker. The second time around was when they attacked Iran, the one that escalated and led to the 12-day war with Iran. That as well, America was proposing a negotiations with Iran in regards to the uranium enrichment program. And so the Iranians thought that we are safe from an imminent strike, we are safe from a war for the time being, So that's why a lot of the Iranian military leadership and political leadership were not hiding. They were actually sleeping in their beds when they were assassinated by the Israelis. So this was the second time where the Americans were being deceitful, and they actually played this game with the Israelis and gave them the green light to go ahead and attack Iran in order to try and achieve some sort of goal. And the third time was with Qatar, but in the case of Qatar, they failed miserably. So I think this failure, which really put to test the American partnership with the Arab states, especially the Gulf countries like Qatar and Saudi and the UAE, who rely heavily on the US. And now all of a sudden, the USA backstabs them and gives the green light to the Zionists to strike them, airstrikes inside their countries. And it failed, so now they have to save face. And on the back of this, something has to eventuate, which would repair this small damage in relationships and also address the real issue, which is the Zionist aggression not only on Gaza now, on the entire region, which is going to a new level, where they also hit the coast of Tunisia at the time of the flotilla ships, if you remember. And by that time, they had struck Iran, they've struck Lebanon, they've struck Yemen, they've struck Syria, they've struck Palestine, and then Tunisia, and number 7 was Qatar. And I think this was going way too far, way too quick. So the US had to come to some sort of agreement to what the Arab leaders and the Muslim leaders were proposing at the White House, saying that we need a ceasefire in Gaza, because without a ceasefire in Gaza, this is going too far to an extent where we might not be able to control it ourselves. So I think that was the lead up to this ceasefire.
Yeah, so you mentioned a line of failures by the U.S. administration and the failed attempts by the Zionists, to wipe out any sort of prospect of negotiations. But we've also seen this failure continue even after the ceasefire. So, obviously part of that ceasefire was the cessation of attacks. And since the ceasefire has been put in place, I think I read an Al Jazeera report where around 470, there was 470 incidences where Israel had violated the ceasefire. So what did it actually accomplish, or what does it actually seek to accomplish?
So for the Israelis, we always go back to the original goals set out in this war. And this was said time and time again by Netanyahu and the Israeli military and political leadership. Number one was to destroy Hamas, or let's say the resistance in Gaza, whoever it is, Hamas, Islamic Jihad, or the many other groups inside Gaza. Destroy them, defeat them, rescue the Zionist prisoners inside Gaza through force, through military action. Occupy Gaza in order to displace the Palestinians in Gaza to another country, whether it's Egypt, whether it's another country, in order to occupy Gaza, which is the dream of the Zionists from a long time ago, where previous Zionist leadership would say, I wish I would sleep and wake up and there's no more Gaza on the map, because Gaza has always been a thorn in their necks. So their goals was always to destroy the resistance, destroy the military infrastructure of the resistance, displace the people of Gaza, and occupy Gaza to eventually reach their plan of occupying the entire of Palestine. So if we look at their goals and then we look at what the ceasefire says, if we look at also the previous ceasefires that happened, we always see that those who were breaking the ceasefire agreement or refusing to come to the table on multiple attempts to reach other ceasefire agreements was always the Zionist entity that was always making sure that these plans for ceasefire fail. Because for them, these are obstacles for their goals. I mean, you can't achieve occupation of the entirety of Gaza and destroying the resistance and displacing the Palestinian people without an ongoing war. We know that since 1947, up until today, the Zionists have always been expanding in our lands in Palestine and slowly occupying the lands, killing Palestinians on a yearly basis, military campaigns in Gaza every few years, but this was happening at a slow pace. Now they find themselves that this is the opportunity to achieve what we've always wanted to achieve at a much faster pace, and we can't do this unless the war or the flames of war are still engulfed. And so they've always worked in order to foil these ceasefire agreements. When we look at this ceasefire agreement that was reached, which is the 20-point plan that the US presented, or some say it's 3 phases. If we talk about 3 phases, it's a bit shorter. Where phase 1 is the immediate cessation of hostilities with all military operations suspended and frozen front lines, so there's no more direct clashes on the front lines, with the release of all Zionist prisoners, the alive ones and the deceased ones, within 72 hours. This first phase has pretty much happened to some extent, where there's a few, I think 2 or 3 more bodies of deceased Zionist soldiers that haven't been recovered yet by the resistance, but the remainder of the Zionist prisoners and the deceased ones have been handed back.
Just on the first phase, you mentioned that the first phase involves the cessation of violence, the return of prisoners. But again, we haven't seen that from the side of the Zionist entity, that the violence still continues. So can we actually say that they've held up their end of the bargain?
So see, these clauses that are being presented here in the ceasefire agreement are meant to be applied only against resistance and not against the Zionist entity. Because the rule of law for the international world order is that the Zionist entity must always defend itself no matter what, and has the right to defend itself, as they say, no matter what. So for them, the Zionist entity bombing Gaza during this ceasefire agreement by saying we targeted a individual from the resistance or a leader from the resistance, but in the meantime there was subsequently 20 or 30 Gazan civilians there who were killed as well, but that doesn't matter, that's collateral damage, but we got that one guy. So for the Americans and the international world order, that's okay because you are targeting a terrorist here. Yeah, so that's okay.
So and another thing before we go on to the different phases, I mean, why would the other side agree on this ceasefire when, given the historical nature of the Zionist entity and what it's done in the past in breaking ceasefires and plotting and planning, etc. So why would they agree to? What would be the reasoning behind it?
I mean, look, it's a valid question for observers who see what the Zionist entity is capable of and see how the Zionist entity always breaks all agreements and all red lines. And as we see in Lebanon, since the ceasefire agreement in Lebanon, the bombing hasn't stopped. There's been hundreds of Lebanese killed non-stop, and no one puts an end, or no one stops the Zionists from continuing the aggression against Lebanon. And naturally, Hezbollah is not allowed to respond. So observers would say, why would Hamas, or why would the resistance groups, which is the Islamic Jihad and Hamas, they are the 2 major ones, and then you have the Palestinian Front for Liberation and other small groups in Gaza, but the 2 main ones are Hamas and the Islamic Jihad. Why would they agree to this ceasefire agreement, given that they know that the Zionist entity would not hold up its fight to this ceasefire agreement? In order to answer this question, we need to look at the background of what's happening in Gaza. The moment that this ceasefire agreement proposal is put on the table, we need to look at the situation in Gaza. The situation in Gaza is that of 70 or 80% of the population is crammed into these 2 small pockets of Gaza, which is a part in South Gaza, Deir al-Balah, and a part in North Gaza, Gaza City. And at that time, Gaza City was being besieged, and the Zionist entity was, the Zionist army was coming in closer into the city, bombing campaigns against the city, and this is one of the biggest cities in Gaza, which is Gaza City. And the massacres were ongoing. The people are living in tents. There is a siege, and there's no food coming in. There's no aid coming in. It's just a slaughterhouse, because that's how they've been achieving their goals from day one, not through military operations on the ground, rather through the bombing campaigns. And this is a situation in Gaza. And then you look at the wider region. At this specific time, there is no real support for the people of Gaza. Yes, there is flotillas that are trying to break the siege, but it's futile. It's good. It's a good attempt, but we know what happens. They ended up getting arrested and whatnot. At that time, Hezbollah is out of the picture. They've entered the ceasefire agreement. Iran is, cleaning up after what's happened in the 12-day war. They're not interested in any escalation or any war, and they're trying to come to an agreement with the US in regards to the enrichment program. And Yemen was still launching a few rockets here and there. But besides that, the region at that time, there is no real help or any indication that there is real help to come and save the people of Gaza. And so the people, you will always go to the people of Gaza and see, you look at their situation, and they're saying, stop this bloodshed, and understanding why they would say this, because of what they're living through. And they're saying, stop this bloodshed at whatever cost. That's what some people in Gaza are saying. But when we say whatever cost, there is obviously a cost, but then there's some things that they're not willing to give up. So the resistance leadership would look at the paper and say, okay, we're willing to agree to the first phase, but just to stop the war for now. Let's just stop the war, stop this bloodshed, let's take a breath, and then let's talk about phase 2 and phase 3 and the mechanisms of those two phases. But we are willing to release all the Zionist prisoners from Gaza and give them back. And this is not new. Anyone who's been following the war from day one, you would see that, I think it was 2 weeks or 3 weeks into the war, at the end of October 2023, Abu Ubaidah, the spokesman of Qassam Brigades, came out and said, we are willing to release all the Zionist prisoners, all of them. This was 3 weeks into the war. In return, stop the war and release all the Palestinian prisoners from the prisons. Let's come to an agreement. By that time, there was, maybe a few thousand Palestinians who have been martyred already. And this was the proposal from that time. It's not the Hamas or the resistance in Gaza that they didn't want to hand over the prisoners. They've been proposing this from day one. Let's come to the table and come to an agreement. We want to release all the Palestinian prisoners from inside the Zionist cells, dungeons. And that's one of the reasons why they took in those military Zionist soldiers as prisoners, in order to do a prisoner swap. So they've always proposed this, but it was always the Zionist entity who was refusing to come to the table, wanting to prolong the war in order to achieve what they want to achieve, which is, we go back to always occupying Gaza and displacing the people of Gaza. So here, why did they accept? They accepted because this is something they've always proposed from day one. It's to stop the war, release the prisoners, in return for Palestinian prisoners to be released from the Zionist dungeons, where we saw over 1,700 Palestinian prisoners and hostages who were held in the Zionist dungeons, from amongst them children and women who were released, and from amongst them those who have been sentenced to multiple lifetime sentences within the Zionist dungeons, were released as part of this agreement. Now, when we talk about phase 2, which is talking about disarming Hamas, ensure and de-radicalization of the people of Gaza, and destroying the military infrastructure inside Gaza, this is phase 2. So when the military spokespeople of the resistance were asked by Al Jazeera or any other news agency, saying to them, are you going to disarm? You've agreed to the clauses of this ceasefire, you've agreed to this ceasefire. They would respond and say, we did not agree to disarming. we did not agree to phase 2 and phase 3. We agreed to phase 1. And phase 1 is just, let's stop the war. We'll do our part. We'll stick to our clauses and release all the Zionist prisoners. And they release all the Palestinian prisoners that we want. And then let's talk about phase 2 and phase 3, how that would look like. And that's why they accepted. So they accepted with conditions that it's only phase 1. But there's always people that, don't look at the bigger picture and ask, how could they accept this agreement when you look at the whole agreement? But the reality is that they didn't agree to the whole agreement. They agreed just to stop the war for now. And let's sit down on the table and negotiate how the next steps are going to look like.
All right. So another thing that I've read as well, Amer, Jazakallah khair for that explanation, is that one proposal was shown to the resistance and another proposal was crafted by the US and the Zionist entity. So how do we understand that in relation to, the first phase, the second phase, and the third phase that you're talking about?
Yeah, I mean, I think with that specific scenario, it was said that when the Arab and the Muslim leaders, which was the Qataris, the Turks, I think it was the Jordanians, the Saudis were there. I think there was a few more leaders in there that met with Donald Trump in order to craft up a peace plan in the White House. And then they crafted up some sort of plan, which they presented to the resistance. And then after the resistance had said, this looks plausible, that's when Jared Kushner and Stephen Witkoff, they sat down with Netanyahu in America, and they crafted up another sort of plan, and they presented it to Trump, and Trump agreed to it. And then when Trump released the clauses and the conditions of this ceasefire agreement, or the peace plan as they call it, it was a lot different than what was agreed upon by the Arab and Muslim leaders at that time. So again, this is not surprising. If this is true, this is not surprising that this is a plan that was crafted up by Zionist hands with the US, which is not any different as we've seen in the war. So if this is true, then we know that phase 1 and phase 2 and phase 3 are there to serve the Zionist agenda. And they are there to achieve what the Zionists wanted to achieve, but couldn't achieve through military means. So they couldn't achieve these steps through military means over the past 2 years, and now they want to achieve them through political means. That's what we understand now. And when we look at the 20-point plan or the 3 phases, we see it achieves what they want to achieve. And you read through it, and it says phase 1, release all the Zionist prisoners from Gaza. And this is exactly what the Zionist entity wanted to do in Gaza through military means. But it failed to achieve it. Phase 2, disarming of the resistance and dismantling of all the infrastructure of the resistance, and the resistance giving up the weapons. That means there's nothing left to defend themselves with, or the people of Gaza left to defend themselves with, and de-radicalization of the people of Gaza,
And so you were saying, Amer, before that obviously phase 2 and 3 wasn't agreed to by the resistance.
That's right. So they said that we agreed in principle to the idea of stopping the war. That was the agreement to stop the war. And we are willing, they said, to hand over all the Zionist prisoners, the alive and the deceased, in return for the Palestinian hostages. That is over 1,700 of them. In return for that, and allowing in the aid to flow in, and to stop the military actions or the genocide in Gaza for the meantime. And then we can talk about phase 2 and phase 3. That's what the resistance have come around and said.
Okay. And so could you walk us through what phase 2 looks like?
So phase 2 is talking about the disarming of the resistance movements, dismantling of their military infrastructure. And then it talks about the de-radicalization of the people of Gaza, talks about allowing the people of Gaza to leave freely through Rafah and come back freely, apparently, and also allowing in humanitarian aid. And he also offers Hamas leadership a safe passage outside of Gaza into exile. So this is the phase 2. And this is something that the Zionist Italy has failed to achieve throughout the war, as we've seen.
Okay, and with phase 2, obviously there's talk about disarmament, disbanding the military, etc. So what would take its place?
So part of this plan, what they've come out with is that the United States and the Arab and the international partners, they want to develop a temporary international stabilization force, which they call the ISF. And the plan is to immediately deploy them into Gaza, and their job is to train apparently and support a new Palestinian police force whose job will be to come into Gaza and control Gaza in consultation with Jordan and Egypt, because Jordan and Egypt have experience in this. As we saw, the Palestinian Authority, when they were first formed, they were trained in Jordan under the guardianship of the American forces by General Dayton. So here, Jordanians and the Egyptians have played a similar role in the past, and they've been able to deploy the Palestinian Authority forces into the West Bank. And we've seen what the Palestinian Authority has done in the West Bank, where they've played the part in order to coordinate with the Zionist entity under the security agreements and act upon any resistance inside the West Bank. And since then, they've been able to control the West Bank. Any resistance fighters or any resistance movements have been disarmed. They've been going after the resistance fighters, handing them over to the Zionist entity. So they've done a great job in the West Bank. So now, why not do this again in Gaza in the meantime, in order to get rid of this headache for them, which is the resistance movements, whom they have been able to destroy militarily. So for them, the best way around this now is to achieve that same goal, but by deploying Palestinians who are willing to be trained by the Americans and under the Jordanians and the Egyptians as well, to be deployed into Gaza and to go head to head with the resistance fighters in order to achieve that same goal.
Allah musta'an. And the third phase of this peace agreement or ceasefire agreement, what does that look like? Does it involve, as you said, this foreign military force in Gaza, or further Western involvement? What does it look like?
So the third phase of this is talking about the rebuilding of Gaza, the Riverina of Gaza, as Donald Trump likes to call it. And as we know that this ISF and this plan and this peace plan that is headed by Donald Trump himself, he has placed himself as the governor, pretty much the governor of Gaza now. So the Americans and the Zionists' plan for Gaza is, once they are able to disarm the resistance, destroy the resistance, arrest them, kill them, destroy the living structure, now the people of Gaza have nothing left in their hands to defend themselves. Now let's go in there, occupy Gaza, and annex Gaza, and rebuild it for what they call is like the new Riverina or whatnot, where you have the United Arab Emirates and some Arab countries like Egypt as well, who are willing, or Saudi possibly, who are willing to fund the reconstruction of Gaza, but not for the Palestinians. Rather, it will be most likely for the settlement of Gaza. And there's a lot of settlement movements within the Zionist entity who have been talking about planning for settlements within Gaza as they've done throughout the whole West Bank, as they've done throughout the whole of Palestine, pretty much. So that's their plan for phase 3. If they are able to reach phase 3, because we know phase 2 is not as simple as they think it is. We've seen that the resistance come out, and they said that the weapons of the resistance are a red line. We are not willing to hand over our weapons. This has been a red line. So, given that, this is like a roadblock to this whole peace plan. And so, within the clauses of the 20-point plan that the Americans have presented, in clause number 17, it says, in the event that Hamas delays or rejects this whole proposal, the above plans and whatever comes in this plan, including the scaled up aid operation, also everything will proceed in the terror-free areas handed over from the IDF to the ISF. That's what the clause says. So, meaning that if Hamas rejects to disarm and to follow through whatever they have to follow through, then, as we see, they've implemented in Gaza right now, there is a blue line, there is a yellow line, and there's a red line. In the blue line, which is approximately only 20% of Gaza, this is where all the people of Gaza are now situated in, which is in Gaza City, in Deir al-Balah and Khan Yunis. This is where all the people of Gaza are situated now, over 1.5 million people in tents and whatnot. Then you have the yellow line, which is the line where the Zionist entity has withdrawn to, but any Palestinian that steps foot into that yellow line is automatically killed. And we've seen instances of this. And then you have the red line. So if Hamas or the resistance refuse to disarm, then okay, for now you can stay in your blue zone and Israel can continue conducting military operations and killing and bombing inside that blue zone, whilst the people of Gaza in the blue zone are still besieged, and there's no food and enough aid coming in. Meanwhile, we can start reconstructing and deploying the ISF in the yellow and the red zones and start rebuilding, because we know that those areas where the Zionist entity has taken over in Gaza are now pretty much rubble. They've destroyed the buildings. It's a demolition site. It's ready to start rebuilding in some of those areas. So one of the clauses says, this is what we'll do. We'll start rebuilding. And there's been talks about a US military base that's going to be established on the border of Gaza, which will overlook the deployment of the International Stabilization Force. And this was in the news. I'm not sure if this has happened or it's in the process, but this news came out as well about that.
Yeah, so it doesn't look like this ceasefire or this peace deal has any sort of real concrete advantages for the people of Gaza, for the people of the region. It does seem like Israel, for example, the Zionist entity, it's continuing its aggression. Most recently, we've seen, for example, the incursions into parts of Syria, bombings. How do we understand these recent events which happened in over the past couple of days in relation to this peace plan and the Zionist entity's role in the region?
One way to sum this up is that there was an interview with Tom Barak, the U.S. envoy to Syria and Lebanon, and he is a U.S. ambassador to Turkey as well. In that interview, he said, Israel does not recognize the Sykes-Picot lines anymore. They do not recognize those lines anymore. Israel will do whatever it takes to protect itself. That's what he said. And another question that was posed to him, where the interviewer said to him, how do we see peace? Are we going to see peace? And he laughed. He said, in this region, there is no terminology in Arabic for peace or surrender. Sorry, is it for surrender? Meaning, no one in the Muslim world knows what surrendering is or raising the white flag is, which is accurate to an extent. where the Muslims in Palestine, throughout these years, have not raised the white flag. Yes, there's been movements that have come in, that have resisted. Some of them have sold out, like the Palestinian Authority, Fatah. Some of them are still steadfast upon resisting occupation. But on the whole, there's always going to be resistance in Palestine, because the people of Palestine are raised from a small age that they must resist occupation no matter what, by throwing a rock or throwing a stick or a Molotov cocktail or a rifle. Resisting occupation is a must, no matter how young or old you are in Palestine. So when we look at this, then we know that there's never going to be this peace that they promise in Palestine. And the Zionist entity knows this. So in the Zionist mindset now, after what happened on October 7th, where the intelligence and the military and the political leadership was taken by surprise, and a small group of fighters from Gaza were able to penetrate deep into occupied Palestine lands. For them now, they are in a state of hysteria. And from that moment onwards, they are like a raging bull. And a raging bull, you can't control it. It's going left and right and straight and center and doing everything it can. It's raging everywhere. And they lose their mindset. They lose their balance. And when they lose their balance and they lose their mindset and they lose their control, everything around them is now a threat that they must try and destroy before it becomes a existential threat, because they are living in an existential crisis. And you see, if you follow the Zionist news and Zionist newspapers and what the thinkers are talking about within the Zionist entity, they are all talking about this existential crisis that they are living in today. They are all talking about, is Israel able to be around for another 3, 4, 5, 6 years? Is Israel able to sustain itself as it stands today, especially after what they've done in Gaza? So for them, now they have this mindset that we must protect this entity and make sure it exceeds the 80 years lifespan. So in order to do that, we need to create this buffer zone. What does this buffer zone look like? This buffer zone means that they have to enter into Syria, enter into Lebanon, into Jordan, and into Egypt, and take pieces of lands from around those countries under the pretext that we want to protect ourselves. This is now self-defense. And it's fully approved and compliant with what the international world order wants or what America wants. So for them to go into Syria, into southern Syria specifically, and attempting to create clashes in Syria and propping up the Druze in Suwaida, and there's like daily incursions into Qunaitara, into Rif Dar'a, and all these areas. Here they are trying to, create excuses that there are threats within these cities that we must put an end to before they become a greater threat to Israel. So under this pretext, they are going to Syria. Under this pretext, they are still bombing Lebanon. Under this pretext, they are building now a wall and expanding the border and annexing land within the Jordan Valley. And under this pretext, there is a great potential that they might expand into Sinai Peninsula in Egypt. So this is the mindset of the military and political leadership and intelligence leadership within the Zionist entity now, that they can't even trust themselves, let alone trust their neighbors. And then they come around and talk about peace. They come around and talk about coexistence. They come around and talk about de-radicalizing the people of Gaza. Who is it that we must de-radicalize here? The people of Gaza or the Zionist entity? The people of Gaza are those who committed genocide, or those who were happy to kill women and children and laugh about it in their news, and continue to slaughter the people and call them animals and treat them like animals. Who should be de-radicalized? Who should be held to account? When we look at this 21-point plan and this 3-phase plan, it talks about everything about Gaza and everything about the resistance of Gaza, everything about them as though they are the ones that were committing crimes of the past 2 years. And there's barely anything about the Zionist entity and the army and the leadership that committed these crimes over the past 2 years.
Jazakallah khair. And so how do you see things unfolding in the next few months and possibly years in the region, in Gaza more specifically, and in the greater region, given that you know, this ceasefire pretty much just favors the Zionist entity, and that's it.
Yep. As we've seen with previous ceasefire agreements, as we've seen with previous wars in Gaza, there's always periods of, to some extent, calm. And this period of calm that we are seeing in Gaza, even though the people of Gaza are still suffering, even though the people of Gaza are still intense, the winter is coming along now. The rain is coming along. Every time it rains, the tents are filled up with water. The children are sleeping in tents filled up with water, blankets filled with water, babies. There's nowhere to sit, nowhere to live, nowhere to sleep, nothing to really live. There's no standards. Even the very nature of going to the bathroom is a big issue for them. There's no bathrooms. Imagine the Muslim women, the men, the elderly. So they are living in a situation where it's barely livable. And this is done by design and on purpose. And the reason why is because they want to make Gaza uninhabitable for the people of Gaza. So the moment that they decide to open up the Rafah border, which they haven't done so yet, and because part of the agreement was that they have to open up the Rafah border, allow whoever from Gaza wants to leave, allow whoever wants to come back, and allow all this aid to come in. None of this has happened yet. Some aid has come in, but not to what the agreement says. So the moment that the border of Rafah opens up, the people have no choice between death and life. Death is staying in Gaza as is, in tents, in the freezing cold, in tents that are gonna fill up with water every time it rains, with babies dying from cold, from illness, from injury, from many things, with constant bombing every now and then, constant destruction of buildings, constant incursions by the Zionist forces. These are the options that are given now to the Palestinian people. You want to live in Gaza? Here you go, stay in Gaza. This is the Gaza we're going to give you, which is hell. Or we can open up the border for you and leave Gaza. So these are the two options that the people of Gaza are going to be given them in this scenario, this situation we're talking about. But then we come to Egypt and Egypt says we are against the displacement of the people of Gaza. So we are not going to allow huge numbers of people of Gaza to come into Egypt. So here we have another issue. So we see that the Palestinian issue, or the issue of Palestine, there is no real solution to it. There's nothing that's going to really bring about a real ceasefire or a real peace where people live side by side together, and even to allow the people, even people want to leave, they can't leave. It's like it's stuck in limbo. That's the situation at the moment. The most likely scenario is that the war will resume sooner or later, given that the resistance are refusing to give up their weapons and refusing to destroy the military infrastructure inside Gaza, and refusing to raise the white flag, and the people of Gaza are refusing to raise the white flag. Where the people of Gaza are saying, we will not accept foreign forces into Gaza. We will not accept foreign forces or foreign armies or foreign, no matter who it is, into Gaza, because we consider that an occupation to Gaza. They will not accept, even if it is Arab forces or Egyptian forces or Emirati forces into Gaza, because for them that is occupation. So they refuse this peace plan that the Americans have presented. This is the people of Gaza. They refuse to raise the white flag. They refuse to succumb to the entities, to the entity and to the occupation. So a people who refuse all of this are people who are willing to continue to resist against occupation, despite everything they've paid in price. So when we look at this, we know that the war is going to resume in one way or another. Not that the war has stopped anyway, but there will be more bloodshed to continue on until a solution comes where the Muslims finally come to their senses and really unite and come and rescue the people of Palestine. Because the people of Palestine are people who are imprisoned. And you don't expect an imprisoned person to free himself. An imprisoned person has to be freed from outside an external force. So the people of Palestine have waited on for 2 years, or more than 2 years, since the occupation of Palestine, and since the Balfour Declaration, and since the Ottoman Empire collapsed, that Palestine, the land of Palestine, the land of the Muslims, the first Qibla of the Muslims, has been under occupation, awaiting. And today, the situation hasn't changed. But what has changed is that the awareness of the Muslims around the Muslim world, and the level of awareness, the level of anger within the Muslim world, has reached levels that we haven't seen before due to the actions of the Zionist entity. So when the Zionist entity continues its aggressions into Lebanon, into Syria, into Jordan, into everywhere else around the Muslim world, unhinged, doing what it wants, whatever it wants, whenever it wants, proposing new laws to execute Palestinian hostages inside the Zionist prisons, which they might pass very soon, where they are able to execute Palestinian hostages inside the prisons, where they are raping Palestinian women inside the dungeons of Israeli prisons, where they are allowing dogs to rape the Palestinian prisoners, where all of these atrocities are happening, and the Ummah and the entire world is hearing this news and seeing this news live, then it's like it's going to reach a boiling point where the Ummah moves. Especially that the continued incursions into Syria, where there is now an opportunity for the Muslims to really retake control over their political affairs, and use that to their advantage, and follow the footsteps of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, the footsteps of Umar bin Khattab, the footsteps of Nuruddin Zinki and Salahuddin al-Ayyubi, and really take those steps towards finally liberating Palestine, in order to see this peace that they talk about, that this region wants to live in, without this aggressor in our region.
Jazakallah khair. And Amer, I think you've painted a very sort of bleak picture of the Zionist entity and what it's been doing in the region, what it intends to do with the region as well in the future. And I was just hoping if you could just maybe give a message to the audience regarding what needs to change, because I think you've mentioned all of these different models that have been proposed for peace under a secular liberal world order have completely failed and have only really favored the colonizer and the Zionist entity. Even with this new peace proposal or ceasefire agreement, again, it's another type of colonialism where you have, funnily enough, Tony Blair at the helm as the CEO of this new organization that's going to be taking over the region. So again, it's this master-servant relationship with the Muslim world, and it reminds me of the likes of Lord Cromer in the early 20th century, from Britain coming into Palestine, coming into Egypt, and sort of dictating the affairs and how the region should be run, obviously in the interests of that colonial order. And so what message can you give to our audience with regards to breaking away from these, I would say, not only physical shackles, but also these, cognitive and psychological shackles that we've sort of, imprisoned ourselves with, because we can only seem to sort of think within this secular liberal framework?
I think one thing to keep in mind is that when the spectators or the viewers or the people watching what's happening in Palestine, the bystanders, where the majority of the Ummah are really bystanders at the moment, watching what's happening, where they might feel helpless and hopeless, seeing that the Americans and the Europeans and the Western world and the international world order is up against this small city of Gaza, and we can't do anything, we're shackled to help them. But when you look at the fact that they have to bring about names like Tony Blair, look at the audacity. After what Tony Blair done to the Muslims of Iraq. And his image is already tarnished in the Muslim world and in the entire world. The fact that they have to bring someone like him as a guardian against, as a ruler of Gaza, or whatever it means, to control some part of Gaza, know that the Western world is on the back foot. This is absolute bankruptcy. The fact that they have to go back to direct colonialism in our lands means that they are bankrupt and they are on the back foot. Because they no longer can rely on their own puppets within the Muslim world to carry out the job. They can't rely on the Egyptians, they can't rely on the Americans, they can't rely on whoever it is in the Muslim world who they've been relying on since the direct colonization, where, you know, the Lawrence of the Arab was in there, and all these guys leading these white people or the Westerners were leading the scene in the Muslim world, where they've taken a step back and they've let their puppets control the situation. Now they are back to the stage where they can no longer rely on anyone, and they have to be directly involved, where they have to directly establish a US military base on the border of Gaza and bring US military boots on ground, where the Americans have to come in and now lead the war on Gaza, because the Zionist entity has failed to achieve anything over the past 2 years. This is weakness. This is they are on the back foot here. This is bankruptcy. So don't think that this is an image of strength, that they have full control over everything, that they are achieving their goals as they've always wanted to. So the fact that they have to resort to these steps, means that things are not going as they like. What does that mean for the people? It means that the Arab regimes, or those in power in the Arab world, especially in Egypt and Jordan and those around Palestine, are saying to the Americans, you have to put a pause to what's happening in Palestine, because we can no longer secure or control the situation in our countries. We can't guarantee you that the situation is going to go out of control. Because if the situation goes out of control, then so do the puppets of the Western powers. And so they have to put a pause to this war, to the genocide, and they have to come in and directly take control of the situation and impose these colonial figures and bring in the boots on ground once again in order to control the situation and lead this war on the Muslims, direct clash on the Muslim world. So mentally, when we look at this, we have to know that the solution does not lie with the international world order, which was destroyed under the rubble, under the feet of the children of Gaza. When the international world order failed to stop the bloodshed, when the international world order turned a blind eye and they allowed this to carry on and was complicit and complacent in what's happening in Gaza for the past 2 years and since the occupation of Palestine, then we know that the solution is not within this international world order. It is from outside of this international world order. So this international world order comes in today with the UN resolutions agreeing on the International Stabilization Force, which is formed in order to protect the Zionist entity and achieve the goals of the Zionist entity within Gaza, which the Zionist entity has failed to achieve. Then know that the Zionist entity is also on its back foot, also is on one foot, is on its knees, because it failed to achieve what it wants to achieve in this small city of Gaza. So how delusional are they to think that they can go into Syria? A few days ago, the Zionist forces were entered into a city called Beit Jen. Beit Jen is in South Syria, maybe 20 kilometers away from Damascus, to arrest a few brothers. And when the Zionist force was in there, 1 or 2 Syrian brothers from the Syrian security forces as well, who saw this, and this was the second time that this military occupation force came into their city, and said, we cannot accept this. We must put up a resistance. So they picked up their guns and they resisted against the occupation. They injured up between 6 to 10 Zionist soldiers, from amongst them high-ranking officers, within this small clash. So the Zionist forces had to retreat. They left their vehicle behind. They retreated. Helicopters got involved. Drones got involved. They bombed the city. They killed up to 20 Syrians. Up to 20 Syrians were martyred as a result of this. So this is a small instance where two people from the Syrian side resisted occupation, were able to inflict this damage against the occupying forces, and they had to retreat. So how delusional do they think they are that they can go up against the people of Syria when they couldn't even take control over this small city of Gaza? How delusional do they think they are that they can go against the people of Jordan or the people of Egypt when they couldn't take on or finish off a small city like Gaza? So they are much, much weaker than we think they are, or that they portray that they are. That if the Americans stop funding them during this war for 2 weeks or 3 weeks, then they would collapse because they relied on everything from the Americans, whether it's for the nappies their soldiers wear, or to the ammunition, or the jets, or whatever it is. So know that this international world order, the Zionist entity, the Western colonial powers are on their back foot. They are weak. And the Muslim Ummah is rising, and they are trying to contain it as much as possible and trying to delay the inevitable clash between the Ummah and the Zionist entity as much as possible. But this is coming, but it is up to the Ummah to prepare for this, because we've seen that the Ummah did not come to the aid as it should for the people of Gaza in the past years. Now we know where we were lacking. We know where the issue was. We know who to point the fingers at. Prepare ourselves for the next round, where we must take greater action and be part of the greater movement in order to bring about the real solution and liberate the land of Palestine.
Jazakallah khair. And I think that's a very important point, that this peace agreement is actually not real peace, and that peace cannot be found within this secular world order, but rather, the struggle should continue. So, we don't want people to have this mindset that a peace agreement has been reached, a ceasefire has been agreed, that's it. The struggle must continue, and we must continue raising our voices, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. Jazakallah khair. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward you, Brother Amer, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continue to support our brothers and sisters in Gaza and in around the world. And wallahu ghalibun ala amrihi walakinna akthara an-nasi la ya'lamun. And we ask Allah Azza wa Jal to hasten the victory bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. Again, Jazakallah khair, Brother Amer, and inshallah it was a pleasure for you to have you on our podcast, and inshallah we have you again on future episodes.
Jazakallah khair. Inshallah we speak soon again. We'll see you, inshallah.
Inshallah. Barakallahu feekum. Thank you all for watching the Narrative House podcast. Until the next episode, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.